Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to an algebra tutorial video. We're going to be doing an example of how to factor a trinomial. Not just any trinomial, but specifically a trinomial where we have coefficients for a, b, and c. So quick review, when we're talking about trinomials and factoring, specifically for Algebra 1, we're talking about polynomials that have three terms and fit in this form. There's a variable squared, a term with a variable squared, there's a term with a variable to the first power, and then there's a constant term. And to factor, we're very interested in what the coefficients a, b, and c are. So earlier in this video series, we've done trinomials where a was equal to 1, so we didn't even have to worry about what a was. Specifically now, we're going to be doing trinomials where we have to worry about what a is as well as b and c. Okay, let's get into this polynomial. We have 6x squared minus 23x plus 20, and I want to factor it down. I want to figure out what it is either smaller factors or smaller polynomials multiplied together. So to do that, I'm going to look at, well, what are a, b, and c? Let's figure out my coefficients here. In this polynomial, a is 6, b is negative 23, and c is 20. That's my constant term. Now, we've talked about a method for working backwards when we looked at multiplication, but trying to undo the multiplication and work to what it is in our factor terms using our coefficients. And we saw a lot in common between multiplying a, c together and what happens with my middle term b and the different factors that are composed. So we said for first step, I need to figure out what are two numbers that multiply to a times c. In this case, a times c is 6 times 20, which is 120. So I need two numbers that multiply to make 120. I don't know what they are yet, but we're going to figure that out. So I'm going to write that out in the green here. Now, I need the same two numbers to add up to equal b. In this case, my coefficient b is negative 23. So I need two numbers that add up to negative 23. And when I have those two numbers, then I'm good. I'm ready to start the next phase of factoring. So this is often the hardest part, is you have to think through what are these two numbers. So it's helpful to start off by thinking, okay, if they have to multiply to 120, let's start listing off all the multiples or two numbers that multiply to make 120. So we've got 6 times 20, I've got 8 times 15, I've got 10 times 12. Those all multiply to make 120, and let's just go ahead and do 5 times 24. There's others, but this will be good to get you an idea what's going on. I'm listing out all the multiples. I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to make 20. So here's a bunch of possible numbers. When I'm looking at it here, I know I'm getting a positive 120, but I also need to have my numbers add up to make a negative. Well, to add up to make a negative but multiply to make positive means my numbers have to both be negative. So let's make this all negative numbers multiplying. Okay, we're kind of slowly narrowing down the process. Now I'm going to look for which two actually add up to negative 23. Well, negative 10 and negative 12 are close, but negative 8 and negative 15 are the two numbers that add up to negative 23. So there we've got our two numbers. And this is often probably the hardest part of factoring this way, is trying to figure out what are my two numbers. But once we have them, it becomes a much simpler process. All right, so there's my two numbers, multiply to 120, and they add up to negative 23. Now, how do we use those? So we're going in reverse, right? Normally when we multiply binomials, we FOIL them out. We get first, outer, inner, last. We get two middle terms that oftentimes add together. What these numbers represent then are the two numbers that added together to make my middle term. So I can rewrite my polynomial now as 6x squared. But instead of negative 23x, I'm going to rewrite it as plus negative 8x. There's my negative 8. I'm using that. Plus negative 15. There's the other number I found. And then I still have the plus 20 at the end. So it's the same polynomial, but instead of a trinomial, the two numbers let me split my middle term into two different terms. And now I've got a 4-term polynomial. And we're working backwards, right? Normally we would multiply to get this, then add the middle two terms to get 6x squared minus 23x plus 20. Okay, we found two numbers, we've split it into 4 terms. How does that help me now? Well, we use factoring by grouping at this point because we have 4 terms, we can form 2 groups. I made everything addition this way, so I did plus negative 8 and plus negative 15, so it would make it really easy to form my 2 groups. Use my parentheses. I'm going to look for common factors in each group. In this first group, there's a common factor of 2x. So I can factor that out into 2x times, what do we have left? 6 divided by 2 is 3. X squared divided by x is x. Plus negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. And x divided by x is just 1. Still have my plus sign here, but now let's see what I have in common greatest common factor for my second group. Negative 15 and 20. Here's where I need to be a little bit strategic. I want to get 3x plus negative 4 over here as well, but right now my first term is negative and the second term is positive. So I'm going to factor out a negative 5 and watch what happens when I divide that out here. So my negative 5 is factored out, it goes in the front. And what am I left with? Let me make that in blue to make it match. I'm left with negative 15 divided by 5 becomes positive 3x now. And 20 divided by 5 becomes negative 4. Well, this is a good day because we now have common binomials. 3x plus negative 4, 3x plus negative 4. I can factor those out. And I'm left with 2x minus 5, 2x plus negative 5. And there we go. We've just successfully factored my trinomial down. And that is the result. That is the factored form of this. These are equivalent expressions. But now let's check it out. I'm not entirely convinced, so let's check it. Let's take my polynomial, my 2 binomials that I got here. 3x minus 4 and 2x minus 5. And we're going to check by multiplying them together. And I think doing the check will help us to see even what we did in reverse. So 3x times 2x gives me 6x squared. So multiplied those two terms together. 3x times the 5 gives me the minus 15x. Negative 4 times 2 gives me negative 8x. And negative 4 times negative 5 gives me plus 20. You see right here we have our 4 terms, right? It matches up with the 4 terms that we found right here. So again, our factoring was the process in reverse. So when we multiply, we should see a similar process right here. Well, the next step if I'm going to multiply is to combine my middle terms. So negative 15x minus 8x give me negative 23x. I still have 6x squared. And I still have plus 20. And so combining the middle terms correlates with everything we did up here to find our 2 middle numbers, right? So there we go. We checked it and it works. I multiply and it end up the same thing with what I have. So there we go. There's an example of factoring a trinomial where a is not equal to 1, and you can use this method to factor any trinomial assuming it's factorable.